Hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to our Codurance meetup. Today's presentation will be conducted by José Wenzel, and the topic is about how to improve your habits with object-oriented paradigm. Sorry. So, José already. So have fun and enjoy the session.
All right. Hi everyone. So I prepared this small presentation. I was initially going to be doing some live katas, but I rather have more of a conversation with everyone while we're going through the meeting. So some people like to have questions at the end. I like to have questions at any time. So at any time that you guys are that you guys want to have that you have some questions, or you want to have a small discussion about one of the certain topics that we're going to cover, then you're free to do it. I don't know if between Elena and Sebastian, they will let me know, and they'll try to find a spot where I'm just on a pause, so they can ask the question. What else I wanted to comment? All right, so well, I don't remember, but I'll sure remember when I go. So this, as Sebastian said, this is a talk about giving you some, it's not tools, but there's some challenges for everyone to keep in mind, for them to be able to enhance their ability to design on the object-oriented paradigm. These tools that I will be, I say giving, but it's more of taking. So I will be making you uncomfortable with the design. So you have to think a little bit more. Some of you guys will already know what I'm talking about, because it's very common. So, okay, this is me. My name is Jose. I work as a software craft person at Codurance. These are my email and LinkedIn, GitHub, if you want to meet me. So what I'm going to talk today about is it's object calisthenics. So object calisthenics, they're a programming exercise. Basically, it's a way of programming and exercising your design skills. So they were formalized by Jeff Bay in his book, The ThoughtWorks Ontology, and the word comes from so the object of the word means object-oriented, right? So it's related to the object-oriented paradigm. And then the word calisthenics, if you guys don't know what calisthenics are, so calisthenics, it comes from the Greek of exercising, but on the gymnastic kind of exercise. So it's more with the body. So why object calisthenics? It means that you're exercising very naturally. So your design comes afterwards very naturally. It is a little bit difficult at first, but then it ramps up, and once you kind of get into the habit of using these rules, it's very, very fulfilling. I mean, since I've known object calisthenics, I've been trying to use them all the time, because for me it has worked. It has worked very well. So there are 9 rules. I will be giving you 8 of the rules, and then at the end I will mention the one that I left out, because it's kind of a given rule. So and it's a rule that sometimes you can't avoid. So for that I'll leave it to the end. So again, I'll give you these rules, but you will have to, it doesn't mean that you have to follow all of the rules at all times. You'll have to find the balance between these rules. Use them if you feel comfortable with them, as long as you take one of these rules, I will feel accomplished on this meetup. So without further ado, I'll introduce the different rules. So the first rule is one level of indentation. So we can all agree that in between these two pictures that I have here, one of them, it's way clearer than the other one. So I couldn't find a better analogy, so hopefully this makes sense. But what I mean with this is having too many levels of indentation will often mean that your code is bad in readability and maintainability. Most of the time, you can't easily understand code that it's highly indented, especially if it has like various condition loops. So it's very difficult to understand. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So in order to follow this rule, so this is the first rule and it's the simplest one. In order to follow this rule, all you have to do is do some refactoring. There's the book, The Refactoring of Martin Fowler. He'll be able to help you with all of the refactoring that you need. But basically, it helps you with extracting methods and giving some meaning to your code. So in this example, it's very difficult to know what the code does at first. So I will have to kind of read and say, okay, I have a for. So I have a buffer, and then I have a for that takes one of the rows, and then I have another for that appends to this buffer all the data of the first one, and then I have a new line. So this is pretty straightforward. So I have a 10 by 10 grid, right? And I'll print, I will print the value of each of them in 10 by 10. But how do we reduce the level of indentation? So we come to this. I know that some people will argue with, okay, but you added just like a couple, like you added 10 more lines of code, right? But the idea behind this is that your public interface, it's way clearer, and then you don't need to know what the implementation of it is. So here I will say, okay, I have a buffer, then I collect all the rows and I return them. So that's basically what I wanted to know. And after that, if I want to know what the implementation is, then I can go to, okay, what does collect rows does? Okay, collect rows, it gets all the rows and it goes through each of them collecting the row. And then collect row, it just collects all the rows, so it prints one of the lines. So this, in my opinion, it's much clearer than the first one, and it gives more intent. And then also the reusability of using rows or collecting rows or collecting only one row, it becomes easier. So that's the first rule. Anyone has?
Thing?
Yeah. Yes.
How do you feel about mutating the object in every call? Like, instead of returning the object and treating it as an immutable object, you're mutating, you're changing the object by reference.
Yeah. So in this one is just an example, but I like immutability, so I'm very keen into I'm very into closure. So I usually won't be doing like immutability with this, and I know that immutability is something that is very it's very important. Like it's a theme that is very recurrent. In object-oriented, in reality, I really don't mind like using not immutable objects. I mean, not immutable stuff. It usually, most of us create code and change the state of stuff. And that's like, you have to have some mutability at some point to have side effects, right? If you don't have side effects, then your code will be just static. I don't know if I don't know if it answered your question or not.
No, thank you. Just to know what your thoughts about it. So thank you.
So the next rule would be don't use else. So I know that there is some people that don't like this one because it's the one that we all learn, that like else, it's the second thing that we learn on programming. Like the first thing would be if, and the second one is else. And we kind of create everything from there. So the else keyword is well known. It's a construct built in every programming language. But so do you remember the last time that you saw a nested if statements with bunch of else's and bunch of conditions? And if you do, like, it wasn't very funny to read. It wasn't fun at all. So no one wants to read spaghetti code. So this is why removing the else statement kind of helps you out with removing this spaghetti code that will branch out. So you want, ideally you want your code to be read linear, right? So you want to read one line per line and know what's happening, trying to remove as many branches as possible. So in this case, removing the else statement, there's many ways to do it. So I put these images here so I can remember from them what are the three of them. So the first one would be using early returns, right? So early return could be you could have some conditionals at the beginning of your code. These conditionals could be two, so you can have an optimistic condition, and then you can have a defensive approach. So the optimistic, it means that you have a condition for your error on the beginning of your method, and then if it's an error, then it will early return and will do nothing following the your code, right? But the one that I prefer the most, it's the defensive approach, which is you encapsulate your default scenario into the condition that you wanted to pass. So if it's not satisfied, then it will throw an error. So there's two ways. Why I like the more defensive one, it's because sometimes you will not find, so sometimes you will have errors that you didn't thought about. And with this approach, even though you didn't consider the error, it will still be an error instead of just going through the code and throwing the error on your code, like the one that works. Then the second alternative for people that don't know this little fella in the middle, this is a doppelganger. It's from D&D. Doppelgangers can shape forms. So who was the person that did the question earlier? I'm sorry, I didn't, the name didn't appear there.
Maybe.
Sorry. Okay, so to the person that did the last question, you won't be liking the second one. So basically, it's introducing a variable in order to parameterize your return statement. So this is not always possible, but it means that you can have a default value and then change that value and return it at the end, and change it according to what conditions there are. That's another way to remove your else statement. And then the last one, which I won't be talking about it too much, because it's a whole theme on its own. You can use polymorphism in order to remove else statements. So I'll have some examples. So some of the rules will have examples, some of the rules won't. again, please, if at any point you don't understand something or you want me to go in depth into one of the themes, just let me know. And the guys, I mean, just raise the hand or whatever the thing in Zoom is, and the guys will let me know. All right, so early returns in this particular one, we have a login method which does, if the user is valid, then you will redirect to the home page, and if it doesn't, then it will throw some error of bad credentials, and then it will redirect to the login. So it's very simple how to do the early return. So we just do, if the user repository is valid, then return the redirect. So I will redirect and then I will return. And if the user is not valid, then you will throw an error. This is what I meant with defensive programming. Some people will shift this around. So they will say, if the user is not valid, then throw this, and then in the next part they will return the redirect. But if there is an error with the validation that it's not covered within this function, then we'll be able to redirect to the home page, even though there was an error. So the other one was having a variable to return at the end. So basically, what we have here, same error. I mean, same problem that we had before, but a different solution. It would be to have a redirect route, which has a standard homepage. And then if it's not a valid username, then the redirect route would be the login instead of the homepage. And then after this, then redirect. So we're using the same variable and changing the variable on different scenarios. So this is another way to remove the this if state, this else that we had here. And then the last one, oh, I did add it. I thought that I didn't add this slide, but yeah, cool. So polymorphism. This is a more simpler example, of course, but if we have this in a class where we have an employee class that finds what type of job the person has, and according to that, I will return the salary. And we have this else statement. So the way that we can do this very easily and way more scalable than this if else statement would be to have our employee as a abstract, and our employee class have an abstract function. And then with this, we can extend our different employees. So we can have an engineer that extend the employee, and then the salary will return the 300. And then the state agent will return 200. And if we add a new one, then we create a new class that extends from employee, let's say developer that earns like a 4,000 or something like that. So any questions with the else, or if there's anyone that doesn't agree with not using the else? No? Cool. Because I love this rule. All right. Third one is wrap all your primitives. This is pretty easy. It's pretty simple to do. You just simply have to encapsulate all the primitives within your objects in order to avoid the primitive obsession anti-pattern. We usually, so there's a small catch in this one, which is sometimes primitives are okay as long as they don't have behavior. But if you have some values with behaviors, then you need to encapsulate them. So this follows the DDD approach. They're defined as value objects. So for example, money or hours, they are value objects, and they are encapsulated in an object instead of being their own value. So the reference here are these Legos, where like if you have 3 or 4 variables and 2 of the variables do something together. For example, a very common example of this is using the use of coordinates. So usually you would see coordinates being defined as 2 integers, an x and a y, and people will use like coordinate x, coordinate y, and work with those within the class. What this rule makes you do, it's basically we would encapsulate these x and y into a coordinate object and handle everything that you have to do with coordinates within this object instead of in your class. So very aligned with this third rule is the fourth one, which is first class collections. So what this means is that any class that contains a collection should contain no other member variables. So basically, if your class has a collection, then the collection is the only thing that it should have. This is because of the single responsibility principle. So it basically will say, okay, I have my map, and everything that I have to do with this map, it's within my class. So I don't do anything else than handling my map or delivering my map or giving my map or telling others what to do with my map. If you have a set of elements and you want to manipulate them, create a class dedicated to them. Okay, so fifth rule. This is also a very common one, and that people pretty much agree with, which is basically the rule says you shouldn't change method calls at all. It doesn't apply to fluent interfaces. For example, streams. So you wouldn't do 1 dot per stream, because streams are pretty useful when you have like multiple dots together. So you say like to stream, then filter and map, and then reduce. Or but more generally, you would not want to have many dots. For other classes, you should always respect this rule. It's directly related to the law of the meter. If someone doesn't know what the law of the meter says, it's basically your classes should only talk with their very close friends or the intermediate friends. So your classes should only talk with the classes that relates to them, but it shouldn't talk with the friends of your friends. Don't talk with strangers, basically. So for this one, I have a small example. So I have these 3 classes. Again, mutability or like it's okay-ish to have a public attribute in piece and location, I guess, because it's actually having a public property or a private one with setters and getters. It's basically the same. However, this board representation one over here, it's awful. The board representation method, it's just terrible. Like, look at how many dots it has. It accesses a location, then its current piece, then the piece's representation, and then it performs an action on that piece's representation. So this is far from 1 dot. per line. So what we have come up with, it's thankfully we have the law of the meter that tells you only talk with your close friends. So we're making the piece instance private, so it ensures that we won't try to do something bad with it. So if it's private, we only tell it what to do. So we cannot modify it or whatever. So we keep it private, and then because of this, we need to perform an action on this attribute. So we'll need to add this new method, which is called add_to. It is not location's responsibility to determine how piece will be added. So we need to ask, right? So we ask to the piece, how do you represent yourself? So because of this, we have this character, new method of character. So again, you should change the visibility of your attribute as a reminder of the open close principle. So it should be open for extension but closed for the modification. So also extracting the code to get the first character of the representation, it's a new method. And on the previous example over here, this wasn't very clear. So when doing this, you realize that you have some functionalities that are hidden on your code that you can extract and then reuse. So extracting the first character, it's a new method, and it looks good to be reused at some point. So finally, we can update our board, and this looks way better than it looked before. It's just location add_to and the buffer. So that's basically it. It's, in my opinion, it's much better. Okay, we'll go to the next rule, which is don't abbreviate. So this is very straightforward. It's often said that if you cannot find a decent name for your class or your method, then you're probably doing something wrong. It probably means that your class is doing too much, your methods are doing too much. It's you're not extracting correctly. So naming is hard, but naming things with the right name, it's even harder. So this is a very, very easy rule that you can start using. I use it now. I don't abbreviate anything. And because if I have a name that is too long, then I can tell that I've done something wrong, because I have like buffer, so print and filter matrix. Then I say like, okay, if I have an and in my name, you can also tell that it's wrong, because you're doing two things, right? So just don't abbreviate. It's not that hard. And then we have two rules that are the last one, so 8th and 9th. I skipped the 7th. That kind of get into more difficult area. So the first rule is no class with more than 2 instance variables. So this rule is probably the hardest rule, but it promotes high cohesion and a way better encapsulation. The main question, it's like people say like, why 2 attributes? This like 2, it's an arbitrary choice that forces you to decouple your classes. It could be 3 if you need. I feel that 2, it's a good compromise. But the main idea of this particular rule is that it distinguishes 2 kind of classes. So you have those classes that maintain themselves on a single state, and then you have classes that coordinate two separate variables. So I know that this is very hard, and people will kind of push away from it because they will say like, okay, I need these three variables in my class, but believe me, it's very doable, and it will help you a lot on the way that you will design your code. Then the last rule, which is even harder, is no getters and setters. This is basically, it could be rephrased as the typical tell, don't ask. It's okay to use accessors as to like get the state of an object, as long as you're not using the result to make decisions elsewhere. So any decision based upon the state of one object, it should be done within your object and not outside, right? So that's why usually when we have getters and setters that do stuff outside, we say that they're violating the open-close principle. So to summarize this, I want to leave you with if you don't feel comfortable with these rules, it's okay, but trust me, they will help you in real life. Try to use them on your spare time. I put here like on your personal projects. It's very, very useful. As I told you earlier, as long as you find one of these useful and you use it, I'll be more than grateful to it. And then my last, I didn't have a slide for this one, but the last rule that I wanted to comment on, it's the 7th rule, which is called keep all entities small. And basically it says that your classes shouldn't have more than 50 lines and your methods shouldn't have more than 7 lines. It doesn't mean that I don't agree with this rule. I try to enforce it on myself. But there are some times that your classes will have more than 50 lines. That's especially on the collection ones. So on the collections ones, you'll have a filter and then create and then manipulate, and then suddenly you have a 80-line method. 80-line class. So it's very difficult to actually run with it, like keeping all your entities small. But it's doable, and it's very fun. So what I want you guys to take from this, it's just take these rules, try to go to your personal projects and try to implement them. I know that some people at Codurance, or maybe some people elsewhere, have used it. On the apprenticeship program of Codurance, we have one day which is only based on object calisthenics, and I haven't not done it since then. So I have always kept object calisthenics in mind because I really liked it. I think it's a very, very good way to help you to kind of develop a better way of object-oriented design. So yeah, that's it. Hopefully I can leave you with some interesting and challenging stuff. I know it is fun to do, so I recommend you to go and try them out and maybe do some pairing with some people and say like, hey, you want to pair? Let's do this kata with object calisthenics. One of the good ones is Mars Rover, and the other one is tic-tac-toe. So tic-tac-toe kata with object calisthenics is very, very challenging. So I'll recommend you to do that as well. So yeah, I know that it came a little short. I understand if people were looking for something longer, but we have a lot of time for questions. So if anyone has any questions.
I have this feeling, for example, with the collection stuff, right? The first class collections.
Yeah.
That looks like a premature optimization somehow. Don't you have the same feeling when you've used this before?
So, yeah. So, okay. So, as I told you earlier, like sometimes, so you have to you don't have to embrace all of them at once, and it's usually more of a refactoring and designing tool more than a straightforward design. So I understand that you would say like, okay, I have this map, then I have to turn it into a class. Of course, that's not the case. We have to take always this ideas and these rules with a little bit of pragmatism, right? So if I have a class that has one int, I wouldn't wrap it right away if I'm doing nothing with this, but I will keep this rule in mind. Or if I have, well, going to the example, like if I have a list in my class, I wouldn't wrap it right away, but I would keep it in mind to say like, okay, if my list, if I'm doing like 2 or 3 things with my list in this class, then I think it would be a good idea to just extract it and put it elsewhere. That would be like on a production kind of environment. If you're doing it in a Kata environment, I would recommend you to like go very, very strict on yourself and doing like, okay, if I have a collection, then I wrap it. So you can kind of get used to so katas are made for experimenting and trial and error, trying new techniques, and without having anything, like without failing at anything, right? So you can, like, that's the beauty of the katas. You can have a kata, you can do it, and then if you don't like it, you just throw it away and just start another one, right? So if you're doing it on a kata environment, I would recommend you to go like very strict on yourself. But if you're doing this on a project like that it's going on production, then I would recommend you to look at the rules with more pragmatism, but always keep them in mind and say like, okay, if I have this collection that it's turning my whole class into a 500 line class, and I could extract this to turn into maybe 200 and 300, then I think that would be a good idea. But yeah, I understand why you would say that it's prematurely a premature optimization.
Yeah. And sometimes, I don't know, he's defending some things, like for example, don't use the get and setters. Go with a, what was it, like,
Tell, don't forget.
Tell, don't ask, right?
Yeah.
So you say, don't do the get and setters. But these days you have like plenty, for example, C# already has the getters and setters in place. It's like,
yeah. So,
but then he says, go with first class collections, which is like an overkill maybe. So it's kind of, sometimes it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the don't get me wrong with the no getters and setters. So one of the thing, or maybe I didn't comment it, and if I didn't comment it, I'm so sorry because I missed the whole point. But it's okay to have getters to get the state of a value and asking the state of a value, as long as you don't compute on, as long as you don't need to do stuff with that value. So if you want to print it, or if you want to ask for it, like, hey, what's this value, then it's fine. But if you're changing the object or doing some calculations with that state, everything that uses like if you're doing some calculations on that state, it should stay within the class that contains this state.
Makes sense. So from this list, what are the main steps or techniques you apply most of the days in your day-by-day?
So from the list, the one that so the first one, it's very simple, and I do it all the time, because it helped me to identify when I have to extract a method. So this one I do it all the time. Then I also don't use else anymore. If I find myself using else, then I try to either do early returns or polymorphism. I introduced the middle one as one of the alternatives, which is this one. Which is this one. But in general, I don't use it as much. So I do early returns and polymorphism usually most of the time. Then wrapping all the primitives, as I told you, I kind of keep it in mind, like wrapping the primitives and the first classes. So I keep this in mind, but I don't do it right away. I wait for it until I find myself in the need of having cleaner code or having a more organized code. If it's organized as it is, then I'm fine with it. But once things start getting crazy, then I'll definitely do this. This is very difficult for me, and sometimes I don't do it as much as I wanted to. But I have felt the need at some point to do it. So I won't be lying to you to say like, hey, yeah, I do this all the time. Like 1 dot per line, it's easy. It's not. So I don't abbreviate. So this is a simple one. I use it all the time as well. And then this one's super hard. I try to do it, try to keep it in mind, but most of the time I'm just unable to do it. On a Kata level, it's simple, and it's a nice level of challenging. On a production level, it's super difficult, and it's like stress level of challenging. So I try to keep it in mind, and whenever I can, I do it. But if the rule, it's as I told you earlier, like at the beginning, if the rule if the rule is becoming too stressful for you, then you shouldn't take the rule. Like the whole idea is to help you get better and helping you ease your design. And if the rule it's making you create like design less or doing like worse design because you want to accomplish all of these rules, then I wouldn't do it. And then the no getters and no setters, I usually do it. I usually have getters only when I have to like print values or return a value, but usually I will create functions that do what I need and call the functions that do what they need instead of asking for the state of the state of the object.
It's a very good response. Thank you, Jose.
Yeah, no worries. Anyone else has some questions? Feel free to ask whatever.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi. Yeah, I can hear you.
So my name is Elias. One question I would like to ask is, how can you start applying this to a company? I mean, you can start trying on your own, but there's a whole team with multiple engineers, and each one try their own way and create a mess. How can you avoid?
Yeah, so my response to that would be like the first one. So first of all, I would introduce it to the team as like a presentation or like, hey, listen, I went to this meetup and this like super fun guy just taught me how to do this. And I would like introduce the rules to them, like for them to have it in mind. And then I would probably start with the first one, which is, it's basically, you have to use your IDE to extract. So you're not changing anything, you're just refactoring, right? So once you start refactoring, you will find that you will stop abbreviating because you don't need to, because your methods, your classes, your variables are doing so little, and they're so they have one single responsibility that it will make the code easier to read immediately. So it's amazing what you can achieve with just naming and extracting. So I would start from there, and then once everyone sees how the first rule of the calisthenics can actually help them achieve a cleaner and a better goal, and if everyone aligns to that, then you can start introducing the more complex rules. I wouldn't say that this rule is easy to implement in a company environment. It will be like hell to do. But there are some of the other rules that are pretty straightforward. Like you can start with one level of indentation, then you can maybe try to remove all the else statements with the early returns instead of polymorphism, because I know that introducing a lot of polymorphism can be a lot very tedious as well. Maybe well, yeah, this one could be a little bit more challenging to introduce into a work environment, but it's more of helping everyone change the mentality of how they think and how they work around code, more than just like, hey, listen, we have these 9 rules that we have to follow.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Anyone else has some questions? I'm happy to answer.
I got one.
Okay.
How did you feel after learning Object Calisthenics and looking at your old code when you start to implement it?
Yeah, so that's another thing. So I started working at Codurance as an apprentice. So one of the first things that you do as an apprentice is you take all the katas that you can and just start doing them one by one, just katas every day. And then you think that you are, well, like you do a good amount of katas and that your design, it's fine. And then when you come up with Object Calisthenics and then start designing with these rules and then keep them in mind, you realize that there's a lot of things that you have that are not scalable. So one of the things that Object Calisthenics does, it's basically, it forces you to have single responsibility and open closed. So the 2 first rules of Solid. And I found that my code, it's like, even though it does the same functionality, it's way more readable and scalable. For example, there's the Mars rover Kata, and there's some point that you have to introduce obstacles. If your code, it's very messy and not very scalable, introducing the obstacles, it can become a challenge by itself, more than the kata itself. But when you have a very single responsibility for each of your classes, then it just becomes like adding a new feature, which is very simple to do. So for me, the main like the main good thing that I can take from it's that it will make your code more scalable and readable, which is basically what we all want.
Thank you, Jose.
No worries. Anyone else? If we don't have any more questions, then I think
I have one for you, Jose.
Yeah.
So, well, I think my connection is kind of bad, so sorry in advance if you cannot hear me well.
I can hear you well.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
So yeah, you were speaking about like the if-else statement at some point. I don't know if you could go back to the slides maybe. And so yeah, basically it's true that sometimes we want to avoid like if statements and we can replace it by using inheritance. But I remember that doing a kata where actually we decided to keep the if-else statement because it seemed that it was like more easy to read. So at the end, maybe we sacrificed the ability to maintain the code easily because we have an if statement, and so we need to modify it instead of maybe extending like the class which comes from the parameter. But we are kind of adding something else which is like easier to read at the end. And so I don't know if like sometimes there are some kind of
that's a very good pointer there. It's basically being pragmatic with it, right? So if not using your else statement will turn into having like 1,000 different, well, 1,000 it's a little bit too much, but like having 3 more abstractions, then you'll have to, like, there's a certain level of compromising how many abstractions you have and how readable your code is, right? So if you have like a lot of abstractions, then your code is super maintainable, but super difficult to read, right? So I can add a new feature like right away, but only my computer can understand it. So there's the comment that Martin Fowler said, that he says like everyone can write code that a machine can read. Any fool can make code that a machine can learn, but not everyone can make code that a human can read. It's basically that phrase. It's you have to be able to find the balance and the compromise on making code that it's scalable enough, but at the same time, it's readable for humans to be able to understand what the code is doing. Because at the end of the day, we're not working by ourselves. We're working with a team that is not with you 24/7 and seeing everything that you do. So you want to make your code like documentable enough for people to be able to see it and say like, okay, yeah, this is what Nicolas was doing, right? And not having some lines of code that have some abstractions that then I have to go and see like, what is this abstraction doing, right? So yeah, I understand what you mean, that maybe sometimes keeping the else statement will help on readability, and that's fine. That's kind of the whole point. It's when you realize that you have the rules or you have the well designed like in your head, that you can kind of make these decisions and still come up with good code.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So yeah, it's basically like making trade-off.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Not at the chat.
No. Okay.
No.
Then I guess I'll say goodbye.
Maybe it's enough for today. Thank you, Jose. Thank you.
No worries. No worries. Thanks to everyone for coming.
For your time.
Thanks for your time.
Yep. And for your commitment.
No worries. Thanks everyone for listening. Hopefully you found at least one of the things useful and you're trying it out. Again, this is me. So if you try something, just email me or write me on LinkedIn, or I will probably answer. So just write me, and if you have any questions or you didn't want to ask, or if you try some of these out and you want to share, just please share.
Thank you, Jose. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thanks to you guys for the
presentation. Thanks.